Okay, Brother Eric John Phillips, welcoming you to the broadcast tonight at 5 o'clock here in the bustling metropolis of Newmanstown, Pennsylvania, and wishing you a wonderful day in the service of the Lord Jesus Christ. And I have with me today on this December 1st, 2023, this Friday, I have with me our most beloved guest, Brother George Widger. Brother George, welcome to the broadcast.
Well, as always, Brother Eric, it's a pleasure to be on with you.
It's always my pleasure to have you because generally, George, you always teach me something for which I'm thankful and humbled by your vast array of facts that you managed to dig out and find that I never knew existed. So it's good to have you, and I'm sure the listeners enjoy you also. So what do you have for us this evening, George?
Well, okay, before I get to that, I probably should share my scripture verse, which is Exodus 20, verse 7. Exodus 20, verse 7. And I may have covered this before, but I like to, a couple of years ago, I like to approach this from a slightly different angle. Exodus 20, verse 7. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Have you ever noticed that years ago, I was never much of a bar hopper, but I have been to a bar a few times in my life. And have you ever noticed that if you go to such an establishment or to, say, a construction site, you come across all these religious people because they're constantly using God's name or Jesus' name?
That's right. Well, that's typical white Roman Catholic culture. That's what I was raised in. That's what you were raised in. Typical unsaved white Roman Catholic culture. And I grew up in it. So. Yeah. My father, who was apostate Protestant, he was just like him. So I grew up under that profanity, and I understand what you're talking about.
Okay. And of course, when you talk about the service, I'm sure there's a reason why they say, well, he cusses like a drunken, or was it he cusses like a sailor, or spends money like a drunken sailor. Well, of course, was never an issue in the Air Force.
The Air Force is just as bad. I was in for nearly 5 years. Just as bad.
So anyhow, but so I just wanting I was being somewhat facetious, but why you have so many people who profess to be atheists seem to be obsessed with God's name or Jesus' name?
No. Well, Romans 1 is very clear. They choose not to retain God in their knowledge, and God gives them up to reprobate mind and then also to the lusts that they commit. And it's just one stage of depravity after the next. And during the time, they really hate God. It's not that there is no God. They hate God, because to say there is no God is to admit that, well, there's a possibility. Well, I guess that would be an agnostic, but I grew up with all the atheists. I was an atheist one time before I was saved. But there's no such thing as a true atheist when times get tough. No such thing.
Or what's the other cliche? There are no atheists in foxholes.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So anyhow, when I prepare these presentations, I usually will look things up and try to make it somewhat appealing to many people as possible. But sometimes I don't have to work that hard, which is good, because I don't like having to work any harder than I have to, because sometimes my presentations write themselves. Case in point, we had a couple of prominent deaths in the last day or two. One of Henry Kissinger, I believe that was a day or two ago, and today of Sandra Day O'Connor. So I realize so we're talking to a broad audience, people here in the United States and people outside the United States, people of different generations, those who are born, say, last 30 years and those, say, born over 60 years ago. So these names may not be household. Henry Kissinger and Sandra Day O'Connor may not necessarily be household names. So do you mind if I just talk about a little bit?
Oh, please do. I mean, these two totally depraved sinners did so much damage to historic white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Western culture that they need to be named, and their sins need to be named off, and the wicked designs they were involved in. And so, yes, please do.
Okay, so I'll start in order. Well, actually, I'll do ladies first. Sandra Day O'Connor. She was born on the 26th of March, 1930, in El Paso, Texas, and died in Phoenix, Arizona. She was 93 years old. Now, she was ostensibly Protestant. She was Episcopalian. However, her husband, her late husband, John J. O'Connor, he was Irish Roman Catholic. As a matter of fact, he went to St. Ignatius High School in San Francisco. Now, that school may sound familiar because we were talking about it the other day when I was on. I said I gave a speech there. Almost 40 years ago. Back I was in high school because I was at a speech and debate team, and so various high schools throughout Northern California would host these tournaments over the weekends. And the very first one I did was actually at St. Ignatius High School in San Francisco. And
was Dianne Feinstein ever affiliated with that, George?
she could have been. I know that she went to high school at Sacred Hearts Convent in San Francisco.
In San Francisco.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. I just wonder maybe there was a connection to that San Francisco institution.
Yeah.
Go ahead, brother.
No, I just wondered.
San Francisco.
So, have you ever been to St. Ignatius High School?
No, I haven't. But there's an Ignatius school over here in Wernersville, Pennsylvania. They have a cathedral. I don't call it a church; it's a cathedral. And then attached to that is a school. I think I don't know if it's elementary, but I don't think it's high school. But it's St. Ignatius something over here in Wernersville, Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay. So you mean the Temple of Baal?
That's right, Temple of Baal.
Oh,
that's what the Dutch Calvinists called them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So anyhow, this is like 1984, 1984. So you're talking close to 40 years ago when I went to this competition, and I guess it was like during my lunch break. So one of the students said, "Hey, George, would you like to tour around the campus?" Sure. And he said, "Well, this is our science lab, and this is our art gallery. You actually have an art gallery?" Oh, yeah. I mean, it's usually made by the students or the staff or locals, but it wasn't like the Guggenheim or anything like that. But it's fairly impressive, and the architecture was exquisite. This place was not just slapped together overnight. It was it looked like a cathedral.
Yeah, the Jesuits are masters of the Baroque style of architecture. It's massively intricate and detailed, as their Church of the Jesuit is in Rome. And that's one of their signs of their presence in the architecture that they use. It's very intricate, and I believe they call it the Baroque. It's not Gothic, Baroque. Mm-hmm.
So anyhow, I was just physically impressed with this St. Ignatius High School. And yes, I'll get to Sandra Day O'Connor in just a moment. But so that is where her husband, John, went to high school. I guess it would have been back in the 1940s. And so he was trained by the Jesuits, even though she herself, technically speaking, was not Catholic. She's an Episcopalian. And for those who don't...
George, American Episcopalian, English Anglican, American Episcopalian is the same institution, and they're both totally run by the papacy. They just have different names to deceive the innocent.
So anyhow, so Sandra Day O'Connor, among other things, her daughter was involved with Planned Parenthood. She's also, Sandra Day O'Connor herself was a member of the Order of the Coif, which is a legal secret society.
Yes, it is. When I was studying to possibly go to law school, I got all these different law school catalogs, lots of them from the Jesuits and their schools. And I noticed in there that they gave the Order of the Coif, as many of these old attorneys and jurists were a member of that. And I thought, what is that? But thanks for bringing it up, George. Order of the Coif.
Okay, so the COI.
It looks like coif, C-O-I-F.
Yes, it's French. So needless to say, I only took a semester of French, and I didn't do particularly well. And you probably could tell. But
that's okay, George. I never took it. The only French I know is a couple of cute little French girls that were in high school, but that's it. That's the only French I know.
Okay, so I know au revoir. Goodbye. So that's probably the extent of my French. But anyhow, her cause to law, her claim to fame, was that she was the first U.S. Supreme Court justice. She was on the court from 1981 until 2006.
I mean, the first female.
Yeah, I'm sorry, what did I say?
You said the first Supreme Court justice. I know you meant to say the first Supreme Court female.
Thank you for the correction. She was the first woman to be on the U.S. Supreme Court from 1981 to 2006.
And are we supposed to rejoice?
Interestingly enough,
is that something to be happy about and rejoice, and we're really making progress? Or is that a disgrace? I maintain it's a disgrace, because when a nation's international judgment, they're judged by women and children. So the moment these women get in places of judgment and rulership, the country's under judgment. I think it's a shame. Should never had a woman Supreme Court justice, but go ahead.
Well, now we've had 4 or 5. So I believe we've had 5. You had Ruth Bader Ginsburg, you had Helen A. Gagin, you had Sonia Sotomayor, you have Amy Coney,
black lady, whatever her name is.
Ketanji Jackson Brown or Brown Jackson. So you've had 5 or 6 altogether. And of course, one of the things that Joe Biden said is when he was running for president is that if there's a vacancy, he would nominate a black woman to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Well, good. I'm sure that promotes justice, don't you think? Doesn't matter if they're a jurist and they have studied the law and studied precedent and studied American cases that were famous. That doesn't matter. All that matters is that you're there for some sort of socialist change to shove down the throats of the American society. That's all they're there for. And they can couch what they say in some precedent that they can dig out. There's nothing to do with justice, everything to do with telling you what to do. And how bad you are and how wrong you are if you're white and a male. Go ahead.
Sorry, I had to drink some water. Anyhow, so yes, I have a gallon jug here, so I should be good to go for the next hour or so. Anyhow, so she, as I said, was on the Supreme Court from 1981 to 2006. So a quarter century. And so you're talking about a precedent. Well, that set the precedent for more women being on the court. The next one being Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and we've spoken about her before. So it's interesting. If you look at all the women who've been on the court, of which I think there have been 6, we talked about the Vatican's control of Sandra Day O'Connor through her husband. As we mentioned before, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's husband, Martin, he was a professor at Georgetown Law.
The Jewess Ruth Bader Ginsburg had a husband who was a professor at Jesuit Georgetown?
Correct, Georgetown Law.
Now, I want to illustrate to the listeners, I want you to see that the Jesuits always have some Jew up front that's controlled by some Roman Catholic spouse or someone that's been educated by Jesuits or affiliating with them. This is how they do things. There is no upfront Jew that doesn't have some connection to the papacy and the Jesuit order, which includes the late, wicked Henry Killinger.
Okay, yes, we'll get to Dr. Kissinger in just a moment, or the late Dr. Kissinger.
Okay, George.
Now, I just want to talk about the females who've been on the court. So we talked about Sandra Day O'Connor. We talked about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Helena Gagan is Jewish, and there's some question about her sexuality, but she has received the the Louis Stein Prize from Fordham University, which is
that's very important, George. So now here are the Jesuits at probably their second most powerful institution, military fortress, aka college or university in the country, Fordham, is going to give to this Jewess a high award named after a Jew, Stein, right?
Right.
Also,
Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Remember, the Jesuits at the top hate the Jews. You read Boyd Barrett's work, Rome Stoops to Conquer. It's right in there. So openly, they're honoring them and giving them awards, and secretly, they hate their guts. And they're busy creating anti-Jewish fury in this country to drive the best of the Jews out to Israel and to kill the rest in the FEMA death camps that the Jesuits control with their Department of Homeland Security. But go ahead.
And notice heavy emphasis on Rome Land Security.
Yeah, Department of Homeland Security. That's right. That's what it is.
Well, okay. The heavy. Also, all your communist judges. Let's be honest. Whether it's a Supreme Court or a Circuit Court or whatever, are part of the Constitution Society. So you have. I mentioned this to you before, so forgive me for repeating myself. Generally speaking, almost all your judges in the United States, from the Supreme Court on down, your Circuit Court judges, your federal judges, are either part of the Constitution Society or the Federalist Society. Peter Rubin founded the Constitution Society, and he got his law degree from Georgetown.
So here is a Jew, Peter Rubin, a racial Jew, founding the what society? Constitutional Society?
Correct. It's supposed to be okay.
But my point is that he's got his degree from the Jesuits, his masters at Georgetown. So here's an upfront Jew that's obviously a socialist, communist, activist judge or Jew, so that the people can blame the Jews in general for the terrible socialist, communist policies they shove down our throats when they're secretly ordered to do that by their masters who educated them, the Jesuits. Go ahead, George.
Okay, and oftentimes they'll have them, these Jews, be their professors and instructors at their institutions, such as with the case with the late Martin Ginsburg.
Yes, Martin Ginsburg. And where was he a teacher, George?
Georgetown Law.
Georgetown Law Center. So yes, so they have these upfront Jews teaching there to make it look like the Jesuits are friends with the Jews and wanting to help the Jews, when in fact they're helping them right into their graves, as they did with the Eurasian Jewish Holocaust when the Jesuits controlled both the SS, Gestapo, and one more, the Russian NKVD. They all worked together.
Heavy emphasis on VD.
Emphasis on VD, you got that right.
Okay, so how something I've said before, and part of it. So why is it the Jesuits will allow these Jews to be professors at their university? Well, part of it is pragmatic. They need intelligent people to teach their students.
Well, that's true. The Jews are the most intelligent people in the world. According to one of my advisors, they have 11% higher IQ than the white Germans, and I maintain that the Germans are the most intelligent of the white-raced nations. And so, yes, they use the highest IQ intellect people for their purposes. That's why they always use Jews in finance. That's why the Treasury or the Federal Reserve Board is always involved with Jews or led by Jews. And then you also have Goldman Sachs. There's Jews at Goldman Sachs, but the Knights of Malta really run Goldman Sachs. So It's upfront, the Jews use them, so when it comes time to blame somebody for the country going into a depression or a war or the demoralization of your children, we're going to blame the upfront Jews because obviously they're the ones that are doing it, when in fact it's the Jesuits pulling their strings because they were their teachers.
Okay, so just to go down the list of female justices. So we talked about Sandra Day O'Connor, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Elaine Kagan. You have Sonia Sotomayor, who's Roman Catholic. She's Puerto Rican. You also have Amy Coney Barrett, who's Irish Roman Catholic. She was a professor at Notre Dame. Her father, Michael Barrett, was a professor at Loyola, New Orleans.
Loyola, New Orleans. Mm-hmm. That's
Correct.
right. And that the Jesuits at Loyola, New Orleans were also involved in the Kennedy assassination. They were also involved with the Knight of Malta, Clay Shaw. So the Jesuits ran New Orleans through their university there in New Orleans and controlled Tulane and others. But that's their military fortress that they control New Orleans from. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. And you have Ketanji Jackson Brown. Okay, Jackson Brown and Brown. Whatever her name. Her husband Patrick, who by the way is a descendant of Andrew Jackson.
So the Black Supreme Court Justice, the woman, has a white man for a husband.
Correct.
Okay. Well, you got to marry up now. When you're black and you get accomplished, you got to marry somebody white now. Can't marry somebody black generally. Even though there's many accomplished black men that could be chosen. Oh no, we got to choose some white men. So that's okay. So that's what she did. Just like Thomas has his white wife. So we got to marry up now, don't we? Go ahead, George.
Indeed. Okay. So anyhow, her husband Patrick is I guess he's a doctor at at Georgetown Medical Center in D.C.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like she's well taken care of. She's got a doctor for a white man who's in like Flint with the Jesuits at Georgetown. So she has nothing to be concerned about as long as she does what she's told in her rulings. And I guarantee you, she will not be conservative, wanting to conserve historic white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Bible-based liberty. That will never happen from her pen. But go ahead.
And well, now getting to the other famous death from the other day, Heinz Kissinger just died.
Heinz Kissinger.
Well, that was actually his birth name. He was born on the 27th of May, 1923, 100 years ago. So that raises a question. This is something we've talked about before. How is it you have all these ruling elite, these quote globalists, close quote, these masters of the universe who basically live to be 100 or close to it, such as the aforementioned Henry Kissinger, David Rockefeller.
David Rockefeller was what, 96 or something like that?
Yeah. Oh, 100. He made it to the century.
Made it to triple digits. Okay. Well, they're all using high-tech technology to extend their lives, and however perverse it might be, but they're all afraid to die because they know there's something beyond the grave. It's appointed unto man wants to die, but after this the judgment. And those men heard enough gospel and enough preaching in this country to realize that maybe the Bible might be true. So they're all afraid to die. So they do everything they can to stay alive in their sins. Go ahead.
Okay, so there's at least two ways of addressing this. There's the natural, and then there's the supernatural. The natural is, they have access to real food and to clean food, clean water. They're not going to McDonald's or Burger King or eating this garbage that most Americans consume. And they have access to real health care. If they do get sick, they can afford to go to Mexico or to Switzerland to get alternative treatments for cancer, such as what Ronald Reagan did during the 1980s, which most people don't know about.
That's right. He sure did.
Now,
He went to see a German. The German reversed his cancer. Those evil, wicked Germans. High, wonderful, accomplished alternative doctors that they are.
Okay, so and then there's, I mentioned the natural. Then there's the supernatural, i.e., the spiritual. What exactly? You just made reference to this a moment ago. One of the long-standing jokes for years is, "Oh yes, how is these ruling elites are living so long?" Well, they're drinking basically adrenochrome. Was it adrenochrome?
Yeah, adrenochrome. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So basically, it's made from the blood of aborted babies.
Yeah, aborted babies. That's right. People have babies. Animals have fetuses. So they're not fetuses. That's right, George. They're babies. Right?
Yes. So, well, thank you for. Yeah, I've had to correct myself. Such as I try no longer to say kids, as I say children, because kids are baby goats.
I had a Mennonite woman correct me about that years ago. I said, "How are your kids?" She said, "We don't have any kids. We have children. Goats have kids." She was serious. And she was right. And so after she said that to me, I stopped using that term for children.
Yes, indeed. So you've had to, I basically have had to correct a number of things I've been saying most of my life, just out of habit. So then there's, as I said, the spiritual component of what people like Henry Kissinger have done. Well, maybe they make a Faustian, a literal deal with the devil. He said, "Hey, if you give me this fame and this notoriety, I'm willing to give you my services, and I'll do what it is it takes to extend my physical life." And so, who exactly was Henry Kissinger? And he's even during his lifetime, he began to develop a certain mythology. He was considered to be the foreign policy guru, not just an expert, but basically he took on almost divine qualities. Well, if Kissinger,
because the Jesuit press worshipped him and never had anything honest to say about him and the evil that he did. Nothing he did was wrong. He opens up China helping Nixon. And so, he just is a Jewish communist working for the Jesuits to further build communist China, build communist Russia while destroying this place.
Okay, and I need to provide a couple of receipts regarding Henry Kissinger. He got all of his upper level education at Harvard, where he was also a professor, I guess, of political science, and he got his undergrad, his master's, and his PhD from Harvard. And he among other things, he was a knight of St. George and St. Michael, which is technically speaking a British knighthood. So you could say, and he had a number of other honorary knighthoods.
I was a Knight of Malta too, because he and Alexander Haig were good friends. Haig was a Knight of Malta.
So for those who are interested, back September 1975, the 10th, if I'm not mistaken, Kissinger was on firing line with William F. Buckley. I know we've spoken of Buckley numerous times, and as you have in your book, Vatican Assassins. So
Buckley is Skull and Bones. Buckley is a Knight of Malta. Buckley is CIA. So yes, perfect papal slave to host another papal slave, Henry Kissinger. That's what the Cypriots call him. I went to Cyprus many years ago, and I interviewed a Cypriot girl. She was 18, 19, and she said, "We call Henry Kissinger Henry Kissinger here. He's the one that brought the Turks in here in 1974. He said, killed tens of thousands of us. I can't stand Henry Kissinger." And that's where I got my education on what he pulled off in Cyprus. Go ahead.
Well, it's just, and I'm sure he garnered that appellation for other reasons, such as he was, I believe, Secretary of State under Richard Nixon from 1969 to 73, and National Security Advisor under Jerry Ford from 74 to 77. My dates may be a little bit off there, but so under his watch, the United States government, the Vatican controlled the United States government began his bombing campaign of Cambodia and subsequent invasion.
Yep. And remember, Henry Kissinger was a member of the senior executive service, just like Fauci. There's about 7,000 of them, and they can't be fired. They can't be removed. So what you got to do is you got to cut back their funds or whatever. But the senior executive service is the real administration of the Jesuit order, overseeing all their puppets in political office. And Kissinger was one of them.
Okay, so you're talking about the invasion of Cambodia in 1970. That's April, May, or late April, early May 1970, and that culminated in the Cambodian Civil War, and ultimately 1975, the rise of the Khmer Rouge, which led to one of the biggest. I mean, there have been so many mass genocides just in the 20th century. It's hard, but that led to the Cambodian genocide of the 1970s.
That's right. Remember, the Cold War, one of its foremost purposes was the elimination of the manhood of the Asian nations. And that's what they did in Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. And that was their big game. And China in the Korean War, we're going to kill lots of Chinese. So many that the American machine guns were killing them so much that the barrels started to droop in Korea. They were so hot. So we have to kill off the Asian manhood and the Asian nationalists of their countries if we're going to have the Pope's new world order bringing all nations under his temporal power.
Well, also, one of the other events that took place under Kissinger was the 1973 coup in Chile on September the 11th. Funny, odd date. So basically, Chile had a democratically elected government, even though it was a Catholic country. I guess they're going liberal. I guess the Vatican and the Jesuits didn't like the direction of Allende, who was the leader of China, and they said, you know what, we need to get them more in line. So we'll install Knight of Malta Augusto Pinochet, or he'll later become a Knight of Malta, Augusto Pinochet. So
Pinochet, oh my, yes. That bloodthirsty savage. Mm-hmm.
So, you had all these things that happened under Kissinger's tenure as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. And people might say, well, if it didn't happen, when he was in charge, it would have happened under somebody else. Oh, perhaps that's true. However, he was responsible for probably at least millions of deaths, if not tens of millions of deaths. And he's considered to be this great foreign policy deity. He's an icon.
That's right. Well, that's what academia is made out of. Now, any true professor that reads and draws his own conclusions would never say that, but then he won't be professor anymore. He'll be gone. Because you have to toe the socialist communist ideology when you're in higher education. And if you don't, bye-bye.
Yeah, so it's just like, so he, okay. So speaking of Henry Kissinger, he was supposed to have written something like 12 books in his lifetime. I'm not sure if, I don't think I've read any of them. But as I said, so you had to wonder. Now, it's possible he did actually write these, but he probably got some input from Jesuit priests.
I'm sure. He was tight with the Jesuits. Kissinger spent lots of time at Georgetown. He was well aware of Fordham. Kissinger said of Richard Nixon, according to the John Birch Society book I have on him, Kissinger said this, oh yeah, the book is called Kissinger on the Couch. That's the one you're going to get. And they take him apart. And Kissinger said about Nixon, I would never work for that man. Well, if he was his, Secretary of State, and he said, yeah, I would never work for that man, well, then who was he working for? He was working for the Archbishop of New York because the Archbishop of New York controls the Secretary of State, no matter who he might be.
So anyhow, as I said, one of the things that I brought up was back in 1975, Kissinger was on this program, The Firing Line, with William F. Buckley, and they're talking about the post World War II era, the previous 30 years, and they're talking about, so what do you see happening between now and the end of the century? And he said, well, okay. So Kissinger is actually in office at the time. He's National Security Advisor to Gerry Ford. And he said, well, we're going to shore up the loose ends in Asia, specifically China, because I know, this may sound odd. I'm paraphrasing. Even though their policies and the political and economic policies are different from ours, that's a huge base we can tap into. Now, people might find.
Remember now that in Korea, it's the State Department that makes sure that the Chinese will be able to aid the North Koreans in the attack and killing of American soldiers. So when the blockade of the Sixth Fleet was in the South China Sea there, I believe, in between China and Taiwan, the blocking of Taiwan enabled the Chinese to go into North Korea and kill American servicemen, about 35,000 of them. That's how much died in that war. So the State Department aided Red China to aid North Korea to kill American soldiers. And the one that was overseeing the State Department at the time was Francis Cardinal Spellman in the 1950s, when Dirty Harry Truman was the president. So they're always building the communist nations. They're always building communist Red China, communist USSR, the Russian Federation, doesn't matter what the name is. And Kissinger was very much involved in building those two massive communist entities, in preparing them for our invasion.
Okay, and there've always something okay, I don't mean to sound impertinent, but yeah, it has something else you have to remember. They're always in charge of the controlled opposition, whether it's the John Birch Society or Father Charles Coughlin on the radio back in the 1930s, or Bill Buckley's National.
Bill Buckley's National. That's true. Because these different extremes always have to say something that's right, but then lead you to the wrong conclusion. Like with the John Birch Society, they will get on the Jews. They will blame the Jews surreptitiously. So they say many truthful things only to lead you into the wrong conclusion. Go ahead, George.
Okay, so something. So you could say, well, Henry Kissinger was an enigma in that, as I said, they decided to build the Jesuits to their press, decided to create the Henry Kissinger myth while he was alive, even before he joined the Nixon administration in 1969. They said, Henry Kissinger is this intellectual superstar. He'd be a tremendous asset to the Nixon administration. So
there's this foreign-born racial Jew that has a strong accent, obviously not American cultured at the time. And so this guy is going to be the leading advisor to Richard Milhous Nixon, the little Quaker that answered an ad in the paper to work for the Jesuit-controlled Rockefellers. I mean, it's terrible, to say the least.
Well, yes. So, you have Bill Buckley, who's part of others like Robert Dornan, who are part of the old controlled opposition. And when I say controlled opposition, is you have these people. Now, allegedly, Vladimir Ulyanov, aka Vladimir Lenin, is supposed to have said, the best way to control your opposition is to lead it yourself. So the people know that they're being basically raped economically, socially, and perhaps even literally. But they need a release valve, somebody who can say, who'll stand and say the correct thing. Hey, I agree with that. I can get behind him. I can support him. I'll vote for him, or I'll support his policies. I'm not talking about Adolf Hitler, Ronald Reagan, or Donald Trump, for example. However, yeah, you're right. The harder I work, the less money I seem to be making.
Yeah. Because we'll take your gold coins in 1933 and you got to have them all turned in by May 1st now, boy. And then we're going to take your silver coins in 1965. And if we're going to get them all turned in by 1967, and we're going to do away with the silver certificates. And so now, boy, when you go to work now, boy, when you exercise your intellect and your labor, boy, we're going to give you war script. We're going to give you Emergency War Powers Federal War Script called a Federal Reserve Note. And we can just determine the value of that anytime now, boy. So really, you're going to start working for nothing when you work for these notes.
Well, okay. I first became familiar with the concept of controlled opposition probably early 1992, although I wasn't using that nomenclature. Case in point, one of Bill Buckley's proteges was Rush Limbaugh. Basically, Buckley put Limbaugh on the map. And remember, early 1992, like January, February, when Bill Clinton was running for the the Democrat nominee for president in 1992, I remember I was listening to Rush Limbaugh, and my politics were still left of center, but I like to listen to him for entertainment value. And he said, gee, do you think it'd be a good idea to vote for Bill Clinton to be president? Because it seems, how would he have time to run the country when he's basically busy sleeping with every girl in town? Yeah. I mean, if you look at his track record in terms of what he did at Arkansas, it would be basically the same thing. And Limbaugh was saying things.
That's why he looks terrible. That's why he has that big swollen nose. All these infections are coming home to roost that he got from all these women that he was fornicating with, which the Bible says, when you fornicate, you sin against your own body. And now that's what he did. And so he was another Charles II of England.
Okay, so be that as so, you're talking 30 plus years ago, 1992, even before Bill Clinton got the nomination, and Limbaugh was saying all these things about Bill Clinton that were correct. He had all the morals of a rattlesnake. And however, Rush forgot to mention a couple of things. One, that he got his undergrad degree from Georgetown University. Two, he was a protege of Richard McSorley, S.J. As a matter of fact,
wait a second. Bill Clinton was a protege of Richard McSorley. What's a protege, George?
Basically, like a student or a disciple, like a basically.
Yeah, that's what it is. So you mean to tell me that the Jesuit Richard McSorley of Georgetown, who was the one who was appointed to be the confessor of Jackie Kennedy after they murdered her husband and keeping her quiet, this same Richard McSorley that kept her down and censored is the same Richard McSorley that trained Clinton and tutored Clinton?
Well, maybe I should. He was basically under McSorley's watch. Bill Clinton graduated from Georgetown in 1968, and I guess he got his. I want to say went to Harvard or Yale for law school. But before that, I guess during the summer of 1968, McSorley took young Bill Clinton on a trip to Eastern Europe, to what was then East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Russia, at a time when virtually no Americans, virtually no Westerners were going there.
That's right, George. So you want to tell me how a high Georgetown Jesuit can enter into the Warsaw Pact countries of Eastern Europe and not get arrested for being from the terrible capitalist country of America? How can he go from communist country to communist country with Bill Clinton with him. Remember, the William F. Buckley oftentimes went into Red Russia. So they run it. The Jesuits run Russia. They run the whole communist bloc. And they put up court Jews to make it look like the Jews run everything.
Okay, so he was able to McSorley was able to secret Bill Clinton into Eastern Europe, the Warsaw. What was the Warsaw Pact? And he was able to, go to Warsaw, Prague, East Berlin, all those places with, I don't want to say impunity.
Now remember this too.
It wasn't illegal. I'm just saying.
Remember this too, but Berlin, especially East Berlin and East Germany, was the heart and soul of the Protestant Reformation and the Lutheran Church. And Prague was a great Protestant city. That's where the 30 Years' War started in 1618, when the Protestants decided to stop being persecuted by the Catholic lords and governors there. Prague was Protestant, and Berlin was Protestant. And so this is part of the Cold War against historic Protestant white nations to put them under the Iron Curtain and the boot of Jesuit Joseph Stalin.
Okay, so when I say that McSorley brought Bill Clinton into Eastern Europe, Bill Clinton didn't have to pay a dime. He didn't have to pay for his air ticket. He didn't have to pay for the hotel. McSorley picked up the tab. Georgetown picked up the tab. And so
multi-millionaire Georgetown picked up the tab.
Correct. So that probably would have been nowadays, the equivalent of thousands of dollars. And he was just graduated from Georgetown, so he didn't have probably 2 shekels to rub. Well, ostensibly, he didn't have 2 dimes to rub together. But you said that it could very well be the illegitimate son of George Bush the Elder, George H.
Well, that's what I was told by a CIA operative named Philip Redman when he took one of my courses here in Myerstown. He said that he overheard Barbara say, "What are you going to get Bill for his birthday?" And Daddy Bush said, "Well, I don't know." She said, "You should. He's your son."
Yep. So anyhow, it seems odd that he was able to go to Eastern Europe back then, at a time, as I said, when most Westerners, most Americans, were not. Now, something else that Rush Limbaugh forgot to mention, in addition to getting his undergrad degree from Georgetown University, talking about Bill Clinton, he also went to St. John's Catholic School in Little Rock for 6 years. So he received 10 years of Catholic education, which is something virtually nobody ever talks about. Yeah, some people will talk about the fact that Bill Clinton got his undergrad degree from Georgetown, but then don't talk about his additional Catholic education prior to that.
I tell you, I have a picture. There's a picture of Clinton in the president's office of Georgetown. I saw it. Actually, the secretary. It was a black secretary that was there. And it was Bill Clinton kneeling at the grave of the former president of Georgetown named Timothy Healy, who was a mulatto. And Leo J. O'Donovan was standing behind Clinton while Clinton was on his knees kneeling at the gravesite of Timothy Healy. So he's behind and before. The Jesuits are there with Bill Clinton. They are absolutely his masters. That's why he is above the law and can never be prosecuted by the Jesuit-ruled State Department, Justice Department in Washington. Never. Go ahead.
Okay, so anyhow, I remember, so Rush Limbaugh, basically for almost the entire time Bill Clinton was in office, he basically spoke about his sexual escapades, his fornication. And yes, that's true. But but Rush forgot to mention, okay, how is it that Bill Clinton was able to reach these plateaus? The President of the United States, Governor of Arkansas, Attorney General of Arkansas, with impunity. I mean, how he never mentioned the Jesuits, he never mentioned Georgetown, he never mentioned the Vatican. Well, maybe he just simply, it was either he didn't know or he was told not to talk about that.
Well, I have a picture in my book, Vatican Assassins, of Bill Clinton, Hellcat Hillary, standing kind of behind him, and in front of Clinton and off to his right somewhat is the Archbishop of the capital of the world at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. And it shows you that this is where these politicians get their marching orders from the archbishops.
Okay, so
yep.
Have been John Cardinal O'Connor at the time,
I believe. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, so I'm just
Cardinal O'Connor by Nat Henhoff, who was a Jew, who wrote the book on John Cardinal O'Connor. What a wonderful man he was, and he attacks the Jesuit oath of the fourth vow, saying it's nonsense. So Nat Henhoff was a token Jew of the Archbishop of New York City and did exactly as he was told to do, and made a lot of money.
So we're closing in on an hour, so I'd just like to mention two other points. And I know I got a request recently from our friend John in Kansas to talk about something in Kansas, but
he sent me a text on that. It's very interesting. Go ahead, George.
I won't be able to address that owing to time constraints.
Go ahead, George.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I just had to have a sip of water. Okay. Two things I'd like to mention before we sign off. One, I guess on the 1st of this month, November the 1st, in Marin County, California, which is just south of me, is just north of San Francisco, the health officer there, Matt Willis, issued an order, actually back in September, saying that all people entering into healthcare facilities had to wear a mask. Staff, volunteers, visitors, and so forth. And that's in effect until the end of March, so for about 6 months or so. And Mr. Willis used to work for the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta and Prevention in Atlanta, Georgia, which I mentioned before. It was founded back in 1946 by Joseph Mountain. Mountain lived from 1891 to 1952. And he got his undergrad and medical degrees from Marquette in Milwaukee.
What's Marquette, George?
Is Jesuit.
Thank you.
So for all intents and purposes, Mr. Willis worked for the Jesuits. Well, not only that, but last year, Mr. Willis gave the commencement address for Dominican University in San Rafael, California. Dominican, as I said, is not Jesuit, but in the San Francisco
very much subject to them, because in a particular book I have, it states that the general of the Dominican order kisses the ring of the Black Pope.
Okay, yes. So in the San Francisco Bay Area, you have 4 major Catholic colleges and universities. Yeah, you have the 2 we mentioned before, Santa Clara University and University of San Francisco. Santa Clara is just south of San Francisco, and both of those are Jesuits. But you have a couple of Catholic schools. You have Dominican in San Rafael, just north of San Francisco, and you have St. Mary's College just east in La Moraga, which is east. So the Vatican has saturated the Bay Area with these Catholic institutions. So people can't go to University of San Francisco, they'll go to St. Mary's. Or if they can't get into one of the other Catholic schools, they'll go to Stanford, which they control surreptitiously, through the Hoover Institute.
Yes, sir. Say that again, George. The Jesuits control Stanford through the Hoover Institute.
Correct. Among other things.
Mm-hmm.
They also run University of California, Berkeley, which is also just east of San Francisco. Through the
no doubt, the Jesuits have what's called a Jesuit house at the University of California, Berkeley.
Yes. Okay. So, so Matt Willis is basically, how should I say this? He's not quite the same level as, say, Anthony Fauci, but he's a medical inquisitor. He's issuing these orders arbitrarily.
Arbitrarily?
They have no basis in science. they have no basis in science. They have no basis in fact. He's just doing it. Well, okay, he's not doing. He's being told to do this by his superiors.
That's right. Just Robert Gallo was told, just like Fauci was told. All these Frankenstein doctors are overseen and told what to do by their Jesuit masters.
Well, but funny you should mention Victor Frankenstein. I know we've talked about this before. That was a few years ago. Now, Victor Frankenstein is a fictitious, or was a fictitious character. He was the protagonist in Mary Shelley's 1817 or 18 book, Frankenstein, or the modern day Prometheus. But Victor Frankenstein was actually a devout Roman Catholic, and he was a medical student at the University of Ingolstadt, which is historically has been a Jesuit school.
That's right. That's where they started their Illuminati in 1776 with Adam Weishaupt, who was a teacher of canon law at the Jesuit school there of Ingolstadt College. By the way, Adam Weishaupt was no Jew either. He was a white Gentile German. Because they try to blame the Illuminati on the Jews, and of course there wasn't one Jew in the Illuminati, according to the particular work that I have that was written, 1933.
What a faithful, gee, nothing, 1933, nothing important took place in that year. Well, anyhow,
yeah.
Okay, so I realize we're coming up to the top of the hour. You know, to have time to mention one more topic.
Yes, sir.
Okay. The other night, I just subjected myself to Martin Scorsese's new film, Killers of the Flower Moon, at the behest of one of your listeners in Texas, Dan. He said, "Oh, George, have you seen this movie?" I'm sorry, I haven't. Oh, you have to watch it. So, how should I put this? It's based on true events. I won't get into the details because people will probably find them boring. But how should I say this? Martin Scorsese never lets a little inconvenience called facts to get in the way of a good story.
Well, he's a good Jesuit Hollywood technician, rewriting history of the peoples of the Reformation and just write it right out of existence like it never happened. So another good Italian Catholic doing the Jesuits' bidding.
Okay, so it basically takes place about 100 years ago in the 1920s in Oklahoma. And the main characters are Robert De Niro, who's the bad guy. You have Leonardo DiCaprio, who's also one of the bad guys. He's the nephew of the lead bad guy, Bill, and DiCaprio's name is Ernest.
So we have two Italian Catholics, the lead actors in this movie. Go ahead.
Correct. So
two immoral Italian Catholics, the lead actors, who love to portray fornication in their movies. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, yes. So, De Niro's character, Bill, or he also goes by King Bill, is a bad guy, and he lives in Oklahoma, and I guess he lives near an American Indian reservation of the Osage, who are actually a real tribe. So he comes up with this brilliant scheme to murder off the people. He gets friends and relatives to marry the females of the single females of the tribe, so their husbands can murder them or whatever. And the plot is somewhat convoluted, but as I said, it is based on a true event. So there are several takeaways. One, there's a scene where De Niro and DiCaprio's character go to the local Masonic temple, and De Niro rebukes him, and he says, "I'm a 33rd degree Freemason. I gave you direct order, and you're not supposed to disobey me."
Yep.
So he actually spanks him. Yes, spanks him, which seems odd. Yes. So they do it, I guess, in front of their shrine or whatever they call it, the checkerboard thing.
The floor, the black and white floor, you mean? Yeah.
Yes, the black and white floor. And as I said, he so DiCaprio's character ends up marrying an Indian girl named Molly, and she was actually a real person. She died in 1937 for complications from diabetes. And okay, as I said, there are several takeaways from this film. So the impression you got is these poor American Indians were being abused by the evil white man.
Of course, that's one of the grand themes of Jesuit Hollywood. Sure.
Well, okay, but if you go back, say 100 years ago, 120 years ago, generally speaking, in the whole cowboy Indian genres, generally until fairly recently, i.e. the 1970s, generally speaking, the American Indians were portrayed as the bad guy. They're the red savages and all that sort of stuff, and they were attacking the wagon train or the fort or whatever, and you needed John Wayne or somebody else to come and rescue the fort or the wagon train or whatever. But then during the last 50 years, there was a bit of a sea change. Now they went from being the red savages to the noble, to being noble.
The noble, erudite, peaceful Indian man. Yeah. And we won't know anything about the savage Apaches and how savage they were, or the Comanches, which were even worse. So no, it's all a bunch of brainwash, and don't ever take any time to really read the true American Indian history.
Okay, and it's very as complicated as Neil was. I don't mean to sound equivocal, but you had some American Indians who were decent, and others, well, not so much. They would now, however, something I do want to say is the characters of the movie. So the movie is very Masonic and it's very Catholic. Almost all the main characters in the movie are Roman Catholics. You see them going to mass. You see them having an American Indian wedding service as well as a Catholic service. And of course, they didn't call it this, but basically what they were relabeled the FBI. They came and saved the day. They broke up. They discovered this plot and they arrested the bad guys. The end.
Of course, the Jesuit ruled FBI is going to save the day. You always got to put them in a good light now.
Okay, so getting to the point. So one of the things they mentioned is that for centuries, the various American Indian tribes, the Cherokee, the Creek, the Blackfeet, or the Apaches, were being systematically murdered by the white man, or that's what we're told through Hollywood. And whereas in the 20th century, after they stopped doing these massacres, most of them were put on reservations. As a matter of fact, the name for Oklahoma before it became a state was in 1907, 1906, was called the Indian Territory.
And we also have to remember that the Jesuit order running the government in Washington, the national government, as of 1868 with the 14th Amendment, it was an absolute war on the Indian nations. It's called the War of the Great Plains. I have a 3-volume set. And the purpose was to kill them, to starve them, to rid them of the West and the Midwest, because the Jesuits were building an empire from sea to shining sea. And those people weren't going to be involved.
Okay, so talk about now, whether you're talking 1923 or 2023. Did you know the average life expectancy for a full-blooded American Indian is 45?
Yeah, I didn't know that, but it's terrible because the majority of them are alcoholics.
Well, it's either the booze or their diet that will kill them. They have a huge epidemic of diabetes, heart disease, cardiovascular problems. And they actually point that out in the movie. They said they have all these American Indians who have diabetes, and they're trying to get this new drug called insulin.
Oh, goody.
And so
goody.
I think they're better off when they're being shot rather than being injected, because at least when they were shot, it was quicker. But anyhow, so you could say, one of the things they say is, when they took away our buffalo and our game, they gave us their diet, and now that's killing us. So
that's true. That's very true.
So it's just like, it used to be that the American Indians didn't have things like well, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, or any of those conditions. That didn't start happening until they started living on their reservations.
That's right.
Well, you could be talking about the typical American, but it's like so. The bottom line is
the diabetes comes from alcohol because it's sugar, and the Indians go crazy over alcohol. So I met my first Indian when I was stationed in New Mexico. I was at the bus station, and he was drunk. He came. I was in my uniform, and he saluted me. Yes, sir. And people were embarrassed by him. And I said, "Well, what can I do for you?" He said, "I need a quarter." So I gave him a quarter, and I said, "Here you go, and wish you well." "Thank you, sir." And he saluted me, and he was as drunk as a skunk, and his inebriation was absolutely pungent. So it's pitiful. That's what they have become with their treaties. With actually, the radical red Republicans didn't have any more treaties. They didn't negotiate with Indian nations anymore. They stopped doing that in 1871. But the design was to eliminate them so that they can build an empire from sea to shining sea. And the ones that weren't eliminated, well, we would have them in our military so they could go fight the crusades of the Pope and be Indian talkers and that kind of stuff.
Okay, so I realize we're running a little bit over time. It's just been just over an hour. If I could just say something. Well, you see, they seem to target different ethnic groups, the Jesuits, with different poisons.
Yeah.
With most white Americans, Catholic, Protestant, well, whatever, is largely traditionally it's been through the diet. This has been particularly true since the post-World War II era.
Right. And now the target for the whites is meth, crystal meth. That's their drug for the whites.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and opioids. Now, for blacks, going back to the 1980s, and particularly in your urban centers, it's been crack cocaine.
Right.
Places like South Central LA, Chicago, New York, and so forth. But as I said, and this is a different topic altogether, and they always seem to, when they're going to poison people and to destroy people, they need a theme song. So something that became popular, I guess, during the 1980s and 90s was rap music, like gangster rap. Oh, and I need to look more into that and how the CIA was involved with that. Sure. So you had the counterculture movement, the so-called counterculture movement of the 1960s. And
it's the anti-white, anti-Protestant, anti-Bible-based culture that was being attacked with their anti-culture or their counterculture. And we'll have to cover that in another broadcast, George. Anyway, we need to sum this up here. So any final comments and then give your contact information.
Okay, well, yes, we'll definitely have to stream at least one more time next week. And if people have any questions, comments, concerns, critiques, please email me at georgewidger1969@gmail.com. GEORWIDGER1969@gmail.com. If they didn't get that, they can get it from you. And if people want me to cover a topic or go over a topic again, please let me know. Also, please let me know if I do address a topic, if I do address it satisfactorily, because that's happened on at least one occasion where people say, well, I probably should go over something again.
Never heard, George. Never heard Jesus Christ was a repetitive teacher. Yep.
Well, I wouldn't quite put myself in his league.
So anyway, give us your
I guess,
George, and we'll go ahead and call it an evening. Okay?
Oh, okay. I'll do that again. So once again, my email is georgewidger1969@gmail.com. GEORGEWIDGER1969@gmail.com. There again, if people didn't get that, they can get it from you, brother.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, well, thank you, George, for being with us this evening. Brother Eric John Phelps with George Widger here on this December 1st, 2023. And if you want to support this ministry, send your check to RBT, P.O. Box 306, Newmanstown, Pennsylvania, 17073. or you can zell it at Eric, E-R-I-C, John, J-O-N, Phelps, P-H-E-L-P-S, and the number is 484-238-5200. Appreciate your gifts, your prayers most of all. I need your prayers on a regular basis so we can continue to have power by the Spirit of God to preach the true gospel while exposing the Jesuit order. And lastly, may the Lord bless you as you seek to do his will according to his word, the AV 1611 Reformation English Bible. So until next time, Brother George, Lord bless.